Let's talk about fussy cutting. One of the things that you want to be really aware of when you're fussy cutting is your seam allowance. You really want to understand where the seam is going to hit the motif and how the motif is centered in the piece of fabric. So sometimes we don't have a whole lot of choices, meaning the motifs are so close together that we get pretty close to the edge with our seam allowance. And if you've ever, fussy cut like Tula Pink fabric, that happens a lot there. She really does design the fabric with fussy cutting in mind, but it is something to keep in mind that, all of a sudden maybe, you'll get like a tip of one thing into the next, or your seam will cut off like the extra point of something because the point goes down into the next motif, things like that. So you really want to decide what of your motif is going to be the thing that people are going to look at. Since we are, let's back up for a minute. Fussy cutting really just means that instead of just slicing through this fabric to make pieces that are like 2.5-inch squares, I'm actually going to choose what I want in my piece of fabric, and then I'm going to center the motif the way that I want it centered in the block in the finished project or the finished product. You're going to see a lot of people doing fussy cutting for things like English paper piecing. You're going to see a lot of people doing fussy cutting for like cornerstones, or for like cornerstones and sashing, or for another great way to use it is for those I Spy blocks that you make for like kids quilts. So you'll have like a single dinosaur or single this or single that. When you have figurative fabric, sometimes you don't care if the deer's head is cut off and it's just, the back legs. And sometimes you really do. So fussy cutting is about caring about that and really dividing up your fabric in a way that you are really controlling how that motif sits. So this project, this improv project with this panel is really all about, starts with the fussy cutting. So let's start there. So one of the things that I like to fussy cut with, now they make, I like to use my large square rulers. They do make special fussy cut kind of window templates. We carry some at the store that have like grooves in the outside for marking, but are just clear acrylic so that you don't have all of the grid lines and stuff to see through. But since we're doing such large motifs on such dark fabric, I can really see the motif even with the grid lines there. So here we have about a 3/8 inch from one side of the motif to this edge. And the reason we have this as the edge of the fabric is because I had a different motif that was butting up against it, and I split the difference between them. So in this particular case, I want to also then have 3/8 on the other side. And what that's going to do is allow for me to center the motif right in the, hold on, that's only a quarter. Yeah, there's 3/8. Okay, so that will allow me to center the motif right in there. Now I'm going to make sure that I am plumb, and this is why I like a square instead of a rectangle ruler. Not that it matters for this motif, but like for the one next to it, I would rather cover more of the motif with the square so I can get it perfectly centered. In this case, I'm just centering right to left, not top to bottom yet. So I just want to make sure that I'm square, I'm lined up. Here with the selvage, I'm going to scoot down a little bit so I get the whole selvage in. All right, we're going to cut that, and we're going to cut up. Now I get to decide, where do I want to go at the top of this? So there's my width, right? And now you'll see that on this width, I do actually have, if you look at kind of the sides here, I actually have less seam allowance over here than I do over here, right at the roof line. But that's because the motif sticks out further than the roof line on this side. So now I need to decide about the height here. So obviously I have a pretty natural bottom to this motif. The snow line is the pretty natural bottom to the motif. But I have some choices in terms of what goes on up here. I don't really have anything else I'm going to run into until the one that starts way up here. So I have all of this room, and there's this like swaggy line right here, and there's this star that very clearly belongs to this in terms of like the whole structure of the whole thing, but maybe wouldn't necessarily have to stay with this in the end piece that I'm doing. I don't want to cut it apart right now though. With improvisation, one of the most important things is to remember that you want to kind of like make a decision, execute that decision, and then make the next decision. But you want to give yourself a little bit of flexibility within that decision that you made. So if I were to make the decision that that I definitely want to separate these two, that would be one thing. But if I'm just, excuse me, if I'm just thinking that maybe I might want to separate these, there's no harm in keeping that piece together for now and giving myself enough room at the top to be able to separate it later. Wow, I'm all kinds of crazy tonight with the yawning and the coughing and all of the things. Anyway, so I don't think I want this swaggy piece though. It disrupts the background too much. I've got plenty of room without it. There's plenty of headroom without it. So I think what I'm going to do, and you'll notice that I'm actually turning the fabric here. I'm not like just kind of like relying on, I'm not just kind of like, you know, doing it across the top, but I really want a very straight, kind of plumb square cut here. Which means I need to kind of line up my ruler to the cut side of the fabric, make sure the other cut side of the fabric is still on line, and then I'll go ahead and trim that. Now the reason I'm doing this is because when you're fussy cutting, you're not necessarily going on grain. The pieces can start to fray, they can get really out of whack really fast, and so you want to kind of be a little bit more gentle with them as you're cutting them and flinging them around. And likewise down here, I'm going to give myself more like salvage or more kind of extra area at the bottom than I think I need. In fact, I might even give myself an extra ½ inch there just because I can. You can always cut it off later. It is hard to add it back on, but you can always cut it off later. That's a lot easier. So there I have it. There is a single fussy cut motif. When we're doing large things, it's pretty simple. When we're doing something that's smaller, and I'm just going to do one of these because I want you to kind of see. I really am thinking that I might fussy cut a bunch of these for some element of this final design. I don't know what it is yet. This is a beautiful print from, I think this is a Juicy Juice collection from Andover, maybe. I don't know. There's so much great information on the salvage. See if it says, yep, it's a Juicy Juice collection from Andover. So if I'm looking at, say I want to fussy cut this one thing, just this one thing, I can just use the corner of my square here, and I can just put my, like, the bullseye right in the middle of it, just put like the junction. So a square, you know, a crosshairs for lack of a better word, right in the middle of it so I can measure it. It looks like this one piece would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 inch square. Let me just see. Yeah, so 1 1/4 inch square is about what that piece would be. And so then when you add in the salvage, or add in, not the salvage, excuse me, the seam allowance, we have to be really careful about seam allowance. We're actually going to make this one piece just a little bit bigger. And so we're going to need it to be a 1/4 inch bigger. And we can mark this on the fabric around before we cut. So I don't need it to be quite this much larger. This is actually, if I look at this, this is actually a full ½ inch larger on every side. So what I'm going to do is, instead of trying to refine the center, I'm actually going to move my square along the 45-degree diagonal. You see that 45-degree line on my ruler? So if I move that on the 45 degree, I'm still keeping the center of the motif in the center of whatever square I have. So that would be the center of a 3-inch square. This is the center of a 2-inch square. Do you see that? So if I move along the 45-degree angle, I'm always in the middle. So I'm going to scoot back about that 1/4 inch on the 45-degree line. And that is perfect. That's a 1/4 inch seam on all sides, but it's a little too perfect. I'm not going to have enough room for your eye to really see it. So I'm going to go back to like the 7/8 mark along the 45-degree, and then I'm going to mark my fabric for that. And I'm just going to mark 2 sides of the square. Do you see that? So we're just marking the top and the side there. And then I can go ahead and cut that out. Probably could have just cut it out too, but I wanted to show you what a marking would have looked like. So I find my spot again, and now I'm going to cut. Now I don't want to go too far over because I don't want to cut too much extra. Oh, there's that fraying. And then when I turn it 100, I turn that 180 degrees. I put it right back in that center mark again. And then I trim and I trim, and voila. There is my perfectly centered fussy cut motif. It's a little off because of the fraying, because I snagged the fabric a little bit with my rotary cutter, but that's what we'd be looking at. And so that kind of work at that scale happens a lot with people who do English paper piecing, or people who do foundation paper piecing, or I mean, this would make a great cornerstone for a 1 3/4 inch sashing. Looks like I'm not quite square there. But that's how you do that. Now, when you fussy cut, this is the other thing that you see. You are going to waste fabric. When you fussy cut fabric, you need a lot more yardage than you need normally. So that is something to keep in mind. If you're looking at a pattern and you're like, oh, that would be super cute if I centered the motif right on there, buy at least 1/3 more fabric than the pattern says, because you're going to need it. See, now I have 1, 2, 3 motifs. Well, this one's on the selvage, but these 2 I can't use now because the cut is too close to those. So I can't use either one of these motifs now that I've cut this one out of this corner. Okay, so when you're doing this, you will kind of want to plan strategically. So I'd be able to cut like every one on this line, but then I'd ruin all the ones on this line, right? So maybe my next one, I will do the ones down here because the ones underneath it are already ruined. They're already cut in half. So I'll do the ones down here and then skip these and do the ones up here. And then I'll probably get more. And when you have this kind of like staggered design, it's really intended for the fussy cutting. That's what it's for. And that's why the designers, one of the reasons, besides the fact that it looks good, is one of the reasons the designers do it that way. So that's fussy cutting. And so for this improvisational project, I'm going to be cutting out all of the motifs on this panel, and I need to fussy cut all of them before I go to the next step. So thank you very much, and we will see you at the shop soon.